I also want to bring in to discuss more of this topic Peter MacKay. He was former Minister of Justice under Stephen Harper, among other positions, and he's kindly agreed to come on the program today. So, Mr. MacKay, first of all, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
Your reaction to this new information that we're just learning as Canadians?
Well, shock and disappointment to hear that this had been a policy of correction services for a number of years now. Obviously, up to 20 had been classified in a way that made them eligible for what is a much reduced security environment, and as was alluded to, access to different amenities, but most importantly, access and interaction with children in this healing lodge. So it goes back to the criteria of what made those individuals who were convicted of very serious violent offenses eligible to be in this reduced security environment.
Okay. And that is true, to look at the criteria in each case taken on an individual basis. But are you telling me, as Justice Minister under Stephen Harper and under the Harper government, because these cases date back to 2011, you were not aware of a child killer being taken from a so-called prison, a traditional prison, and sent to a healing lodge?
I don't know why that would surprise you. It wouldn't be under the justice portfolio. It would, of course, be under public safety. But yes, that's what I'm telling you. And what I'm telling you is this, that every individual case is assessed on the facts and the eligibility based on the degree of violence, based on whether they are, in fact, Aboriginal, based on whether they have, in fact, indicated signs of rehabilitation while they were incarcerated, how long they would be into their sentence, all of those and other considerations. In the McClintic case, let's be clear, this decision was made by Corrections Canada 8 years into a 25-year sentence, where they were arguably the most horrific circumstances one could imagine. This was an abduction, a rape, torture, and murder with a hammer of a little girl. And I don't know who in their right mind would ever assume that this would be a proper decision. And so, yes, the decision has now been reversed and she's back in a much more secure environment. But the question, and all of the politics aside, is does the population trust the government ultimately to protect their children? That's what Canadians are outraged and concerned about.
Fair enough, Mr. MacKay. And with all due respect, yes, it may not have fallen under the mandate of the Justice Department and instead fallen under public safety, as you so clearly point out.
Right.
But you're telling me your government, no one in your government knew that was happening?
Well, I didn't. That's the question that you've asked me. And I know, this is a show about politics, but this is a show really about public safety. And I think what people want to know is that the system is going to protect them and that individuals, when they are aware, take the proper steps to secure these individuals who are clearly a risk to the public. In the case of McClintic, let's not forget, she also was involved in violent activity while incarcerated prior to this transfer. And so that's, again, an important consideration that goes to the very root of how this happened and how she could wind up in an unsecure, unfenced environment where she had access to other children.
Correct. And that is indeed what her father said, that he felt that she was not deserving of this opportunity at this point in her incarceration. And you talk about not wanting to bring politics into it, sir, but politics were brought into it. It was brought up in the House. The Liberal government was really, its feet were held to the fire, likely correctly so.
Yes.
If we're being nonpartisan here. But my point is, this case was used to forward political agendas when at the end of the day, it was happening under both governments.
And I suspect that if you and other journalists and members of the opposition when we were in government brought similar cases forward, we would have undergone the same scrutiny. And that's fair game. That's how our system works. But I'm telling you that I certainly wasn't aware that we would have had any individual resembling the circumstances of a McClintic case, which did happen when we were in government. Mm-hmm. And she was in a maximum security facility serving time for killing this young child. And so, it is surprising that this practice has gone on. And so I'm not trying to shift blame or abrogate responsibility. What I'm saying is we have to ensure that we do better going forward and not try to use Orwellian language and statistics or trying to look back and justify it and blame a previous government. or calling it a bad practice, as Ralph Goodale did. This is horrific. People need to feel safe. Their children need to feel safe, and we need to do better collectively as a country.
For sure. This was bad practice, though, happening again back to 2011. And so we can, argue about how this should never happen in the first place, but it did happen. Moving forward, though, let's perhaps
let's look at the circumstances of those cases if you want to be specific about it.
We can't look at them because of privacy regulations. We don't know about these other prisoners who were incarcerated and at what term they were sent to these.
We absolutely can find out what they were convicted of and what the circumstances
For sure.
were. That's part of the public record.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. But again, this one particular case of Terri-Lynne McClintic was the only one that was used in a fashion to make changes, which again, most people, I'm assuming, the majority of Canadians agree with the changes that were made by the Public Safety Minister now, Ralph Goodale. So I'll ask you that question. Do you think the regulations have been tightened enough?
Well, we don't know. We don't know yet. We don't know what the criteria is. We don't know what changes have actually been in effect. The Public Safety Minister ordered a review. We know that Ms. McClintic is now back in a more secure facility, but I don't think there's been a complete public disclosure of what the new criteria should be. And so hopefully the government, hopefully Corrections Canada will be forthcoming on how we have a more secure system to protect the public in the future.
Yeah. Listen, I'm out of time, but I do appreciate you coming on. This wasn't about, pointing blame during your era, but just to sort of point out that this actually was happening for a while and trying to understand how that process worked.
Well, it is part of the nonpartisan public service have a big hand in how these decisions are made. And we saw it in previous instances when there were quotas as to when prisoners were being transferred from maximum, medium, and security facilities into less secure facilities. And so some of this happens within the bureaucracy, but government is ultimately to be held to account.
Peter MacKay, former Justice Minister and also Minister of National Defence and Foreign Affairs. Appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to speak to you.